Was that? No. I've been, but I haven't gone to. I'd love to.
Okay. So our, sorry for the slight technical difficulties, but we're gonna get started. It's really a great pleasure to welcome Ed Kashi to Santa Fe. Just found out that we're the beginning of his tour. So it's opening night. Thank you for coming. Take it away, Ed.
And I'm not nervous at all.
Okay. Well, that's why we just threw in some technical difficulties.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle and Sid, and all of you guys for showing up tonight. Sure, use the mic. Oh, right. So, yeah, for me, this is, I've done a couple of virtual presentations of this work, but this is the first in-person one, and I've got another 6 or 7 in the next 2 months. And anyway, it's been going to be going on for a while. But so, yeah, you know, this is a really interesting. This is something different for me. Normally, when I present my work, and in previous books that I've produced, you know, they're often issue oriented. You know, I come from the world of photojournalism and documentary work, so you know, so much of my work is very focused on an issue or a theme, and increasingly advocacy work, where I'm really devoting my work to trying to make a positive change in the world through the stories that I tell and the collaborations that I create. And so this book, though, is a culmination of 40 years of thinking about and photographing what I coined when I was a 19-year-old photo student in London and didn't know what the hell I was doing, the abandoned moment. And for me, the abandoned moment represents some of the qualities that really I fell in love with, that made me fall in love with photography. And as the years and the decades have gone on, have maintained that sort of passionate, like a love affair with this craft and with this medium. And it embodies, you know, energy. The abandoned moment is, you know, energy and keen observation of the world and reacting, you know, very quick reaction. Sometimes especially in the earlier iterations of doing this work, it was even a little aggressive. When I look back on it now, especially with the conversations that we're having in our field that we hadn't had previously about, you know, what is the impact of not of our work, but of ourselves in situations. You know, I've always said, you know, I work to maintain the dignity of my subjects and be sort of a gentle footprint. I love there's one kind of quote or an anecdote from Cartier-Bresson where he basically said, you know, if my job is to photograph a bed of tulips, I want to make sure that I've left no footprint in that bed when I'm done. And I think that ethos has always been, you know, I've always held that close to my heart as well. But doing this kind of work where I am inserting myself into situations that on some level I might have no right to be there, or, you know, it's a very, very tricky situations. People are in compromised or vulnerable positions. You know, I've had to learn over the years, you know, how I need to behave to reduce or minimize the impact of myself on the people I'm photographing. So I'm going to share some pictures, and also this is an unusual presentation for me because I'm going to talk about process, and that's something I don't do as much. So strap in, and here we go. So the first thing I want to do is I want to share a short video that I created. And at this stage in my career, I'd say for the last 20 years, actually, I've been working a lot in film and in video, and it's become a really important, in some ways, dominant part of my storytelling. So I want to show this short video, and then we're gonna talk. All right. So Chris, I was saying, I think the focus is a little off, but not that you could tell this work, but anyway, it's interesting. And first of all, I just want to back up. I wanted to also thank, Michelle and Sid, that I'm really honored that they've taken me on in their stable of photographers, because there are not many galleries in the country that have dedicated themselves to, this kind of work. And so support them. Yeah, so for me, this approach to photography is, it's like where the camera is an extension of my body, but the camera is rarely to my eye. And I think that's one of the fundamental things I've learned through the years. But it all began in Bath, England in 1977, when I was, a photo student stumbling around with my friend Ted, who's now a amazing still life photographer in New York City. And we were just kids, but we'd fallen in love with this craft, this thing called photography. And, we're whatever, 19 years old, like, what the hell are we going to do with our lives? Who are we kidding? But anyway, we forged ahead. And so we were in Bath, and we're taking some pictures. I was experimenting with flash for the first time. And then I made this image, and this is the image that really, born this idea of the abandoned moment, where in an instant when I trip the shutter, I'm absolutely out of control. I'm out of control. I'm not being precise, as Cartier-Bresson, coined the decisive moment. And I do a lot of that work too, where I am bearing down in the viewfinder and I'm looking at every piece of the real estate of that frame to get everything exactly right. This is the opposite of that. This is more where I'm sort of blustering through the world, and the camera could be anywhere, but it is not here. And it's like an extension of my body. And it's something that, early on I experimented with. So then after university, I moved to San Francisco. I'm from New York. And I was 21 years old. I started to stalk the neighborhoods of San Francisco, Chinatown, the Mission District, the Financial District. And I started to basically, over about a 1-year period, work at dusk, because I was also really into working with flash, blur, slow shutter speed and strobe, to sort of freeze action in this kind of reverie of movement. And that was really that's where I sort of took this idea of the abandoned moment for myself to this other level. And, for those of you who are photographers, or frankly, anything you do in your life, when you feel like you've done it well, or you feel for yourself, not what anyone else says, where you go like, wow, I really like that thing I've produced, whatever it is, it gives you, it emboldens you, and it kind of teaches you, okay, so that's working. I need to try to do more of that. And that's what happened with this work. And so, what's also interesting is how the process, the approach has changed as I shifted from film-based to digital photography. When I was photographing in film, I might be hard for you to decipher all this, but there's very few rapid fire sequences. Almost every image is a bit different. And so whereas with the digital process, as you'll see, I'll share with you, it's a much more, almost like a cinematic flow. There's also something about eye contact, as a documentarian, and particularly as in photojournalism, often I think one of the tropes or one of the ideas is that if someone's looking in the camera, then it's not an authentic, candid moment. And I pride myself in creating intimate, candid moments. That is something with my work that something that I coined early on, and it's something I always strive for. You know, whenever someone looks at a picture I've made, especially of a very intimate or intense situation, and they're, you know, it's like, how did you do that? You're not there. That is, I feel like I've succeeded, you know, because it's not about me. I don't want to be a part of the image. But what's interesting with this work is how often even the dogs would look at the camera, because I was literally, when I was doing this, I was literally walking the street and just like thrusting my camera in people. I mean, I'm horrified actually when I think about that. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But I think it's something that's come up more recently, you know, about this idea of, you know, what do photographers have the right to photograph and where, and, you know, what's appropriate behavior, inappropriate behavior. You know, when you're doing street photography, and this is a kind of street photography, you know, you can't ask people. You just can't. You have to, you're trying to capture an authentic, candid moment. So this book is what I consider the last in a trilogy of books, I hope mid-career, where I've looked back at my work and gone through my archives to, you know, I don't know, have you guys heard of Don McCullin, famous British photojournalist, and I know you know his work. And one time I was at a lecture and I just loved what he said, where he would, you know, as he would go to bed in his country home in Surrey, he would hear his photographs talking to each other. And I thought that was such a beautiful sentiment. And in many ways, I have learned that and adapted that to my own practice. And this book is really a culmination, is a fruition of that, where, you know, I basically am decontextualizing my work outside of its original form. So as, you know, my career developed and I started to do a lot more work in conflict zones, or particularly in places where there was civil unrest, this approach actually became a very practical tool for me. This is in Northern Ireland, where I really cut my teeth. I did my first really major personal project. I spent 3 years looking at the Protestant community during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And this was a time where I realized that I started to see, like, when you bring the camera up, this act, it can be viewed as a violent act for many people, or it's an act that sort of changes the whole temperature, the whole complexion of a situation. So this idea of my approach to the abandoned moment really became very useful, working in areas where a camera can be a threat. And frankly, back then, it seems so much more innocent than it is now. Because back then it was very rare that journalists were targeted, and now that has become a very real factor, like what's happening in Ukraine right now, where, you know, clearly Russians are targeting some journalists. So that kind of protection we had, or sense of autonomy, however real or imagined it was, doesn't exist in the same way. So this is in Hebron in the West Bank. I spent 3 years working on a project about sort of Messianic Jewish settlers in the West Bank. You know, I was fascinated by, you know, this group of people that were willing to sort of live in a place where nobody wanted them. And in the city of Hebron, it's a city of about 300,000 Palestinians with an enclave of about roughly 500 Jewish settlers. And I think there's like one soldier to every settler there to protect them. So again, as my career moved on, as my work evolved, and I started to do more and more kind of pretty intense documentary and journalistic work. This is a protest in Ankara in Turkey. This approach was very useful in terms of being a little less visible, and also being able to capture scenes that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to capture. This is in Lebanon. This is the Lebanese army training. Yeah, the issue of invisibility is something maybe I'll talk about, you know, a little later. But I actually wrote an essay that appeared in Time Magazine about, I want to say 7-8 years ago, talking about, you know, kind of like what happens when you've perfected becoming invisible when you're in your real life, and you actually like I sort of felt I had lost my ability, much to my wife's dismay, to actually be social, because it's like a different skill set you've developed. And well, we can go on and have a therapy session, but doing this work takes a tremendous toll, even if you're not doing hardcore war photography. That's even another level. And by the way, these quotes are by the great Alison Nordstrom, who wrote the introduction to my book. She's the former curator of the George Eastman House Museum. Actually, this is the second forward she's written for me in one of my books. So what I want to share with you here is sort of how the sort of process has changed once I went digital. So this is 2003 in Iraq. I sent myself to Iraq in 2003 and 4 about 5 times, wanting to do work on Iraq after Saddam, because then it would be safe to work there. Ha! Yeah, that lasted about 6 months. Anyway, but so one of the projects I worked on, and just so you know, my parents are from Baghdad. They were born and raised there. I'm a first generation American. Thankfully, they moved to New York, and I was born in New York. But I did not go to Iraq because of that sentimentality, because I didn't grow up really identifying with that part of my heritage. But through my work, it made me see and understand a little better that heritage. It's a little tricky because my family is Jewish, so that meant when I would go to these places, I actually had to hide my true identity, which is a whole nother conversation. So anyway, so this is a sequence where I was going out night after night with the new Iraqi police, and every night someone died or something happened. It was absolutely traumatic. So just an idea of like the chaos of working. This is literally frame by frame in this scene. So they've caught these 2 guys, and these guys are scared. I'm making a lot of really bad pictures along the way. They find this knife, they pull it out. So, but it's this very visceral. It's like a dance when I'm photographing this way. It's like I'm trying to pay attention again, observing what's going on, reacting, and trying to figure out where do I need to be to get that image I'm looking for. And sometimes it happens, and sometimes it doesn't. And then there's just I'm a human being, so I'm also. This is a tough situation to observe, and now the police are they're remembering there's a journalist with them. Yeah, and then they start to. This is going a little slow. They start to beat on these guys, and they're getting pretty rough, throwing them around, and then hitting them, and then at some point, their commander. I just want to get to this point. Sorry, this is going a little slow. And these guys were not terrorists. This is not like Al-Qaeda. Well, ISIS didn't exist then. So, and at some point, their commander turns to them and goes, "Stop hitting them. There's a journalist here." My interpreter was like, "Tell me that," and I was like, "Oh, that's rich." Okay. Just the total terror in their eyes. And as I say, like sometimes you have to work your way through it. You have to make a lot of mediocre or bad pictures to get to the picture. I normally don't like show my underwear here, but this is what's happening. That was a really bad analogy. I also think it's fascinating, though, to kind of look behind, uncover like what is the process, and that's the image that was derived out of that scene. So this is actually one of the last times I saw my mother. She was living in Florida. Went to visit her with my then girlfriend, who is now my wife, Julie. And this is one of the last images I made of her. But a similar thing where I'm not setting up. I'm just kind of going with the flow. And there's an energy to this approach that I really appreciate. While I love making images that are perfect and perfectly balanced, and especially as a visual storyteller, where generally I approach the world and I approach my work in a way where I'm trying to insert myself into the situation, which will have the visual elements that will let me tell the story I'm trying to tell, right? And this is different. This is just more free flowing. This is in Cairo, City of the Dead. This is a story I worked on about heroin addicts in Poland. This was in 1990, 91. And I've done a lot of work in Nigeria. I produced a book, Curse of the Black Gold, on the impact of oil in the Niger Delta, which is the part of Nigeria that produces oil. Nigeria is one of the 10th largest exporters of oil in the world. But, you know, the people are amazing, but the country is a mess. You know, this sort of serendipity, I could never, you know that his face would be in between the legs like that. I love that kind of magic, that stuff you can't plan for, and you don't even know you've gotten in the moment. And then you look at your work and you're like, damn. All right, so I want to take you through a couple of sequences. So this is in India. I was working on a story, this is in 2007, with National Geographic, looking at the Golden Quadrilateral Highway. It's a huge highway project, the largest infrastructure project in the history of India. And I was using it as a kind of metaphor for how India was modernizing. You know, in some ways they're making tremendous strides, and in other ways, you know, they're not. And so it was the end of a long day, and we're in rural Maharashtra state, which is where Mumbai is, on the western coast of India. And we hear this loud music and raucous sounds in the distance. So of course we drive to it, and it happened to be a celebration for Ganesh in this tiny little village. So I know that these scenes look good, but I hate photographing Holi because I just don't like having that stuff all over me and all over my gear. But of course it's very visual. So here's another example of where I enter the scene. You know, of course, I have my interpreter, you know, quickly explain who we are, what we're doing. We have permission to photograph. And so I sort of, you know, blunder forth, and, you know, chaotic scene, hard to really make sense of it, especially because we weren't there. We hadn't been there before it started. So, you know, this is sort of learning on the fly. And all these characters, and a lot of these folks are pretty drunk at this point too. Of course, that was the image that came out of that. This was the scene. And they start shooting off fireworks. And, you know, when I'm working in this approach, I'm willing to, you know, it's like a bit scattershot in a way. So I accept that I have to get through a lot of, you know, as I said, a lot of mediocre, unsuccessful images to get to the one. And again, in the moment, I didn't realize, you know, the image I had made. I think I kind of left the scene feeling flustered, and also I was completely covered in this red, what is it? It's whatever the powder is, but anyway. So, and then one other scene in India, this is on the same project. So this was not an infrastructure story, but when there were glimpses of it, I tried to capture it. So this is along the Ganges River. This is in northern India here. And we saw this, you know, we saw this huge group of water buffalo with their shepherd. And so he popped out of the car, again, asked permission. The kid was overjoyed. And I'm not a great animal photographer, but, you know, I'm sort of working my way. Sometimes it's like reverse sculpture, you know, where I'm not subtracting, I'm adding as I go along. And again, always keenly observing the situation, you know, using peripheral vision, trying to get a sense of, you know, what, not just what's in front of me, but what's around me, what might transpire next, you know, who's coming into the scene, who's leaving the scene. It's a very active way of photographing. And then this boy comes on the scene. It's quite an intense look he gave me. It was a bit mischievous, actually. And then he starts running down this sort of sandy hill, and I just run down with him. And again, I'm like just basically running down, photographing. I'm not doing this, and I've done this enough now that I have a sense of whatever focal length I'm using, what I'm capturing. It's sort of like if you learn to play the violin at some point, first you start with tape for the frets, and then you get rid of them, and then you're literally just you it's like working with a Leica. You just understand the positioning by feel. I'm never sure when the moment has passed, or as I said, or even if I got the moment. And this is the image that came of that scene. I'm now back in Nigeria. This is in northern Nigeria, which is the Muslim part of the country. And Nigeria is very much, 50% Christian, 50% Muslim. I was working on a story, this is in 2013, about the Christian-Muslim divide and the impact of Boko Haram, which is was then the most violent insurgency in Africa. Now they've aligned themselves with ISIS and Al Qaeda, so it's just a real mess. But this was a situation where I could, like my driver and the fixer, they really were hesitant to have me or the writer leave the car very often because of fear of kidnapping. But I saw this one scene, and these are like the kids are coming home from school, and this is their daily walk, and this is so messed up. This is one of the 10th largest producers of oil and gas in the world. Their children should not be, enduring these conditions. So I jumped out of the car. I think my fixer was pretty pissed at me, and I think I was only out for 5 or 10 minutes, but I made this image. And this is horse dancing in Pakistan, in Baluchistan. This is in Kurdistan in southeastern Turkey. It's in the Philippines. I was working in a story about the Aetas. These are people who were living on the slopes of Mount Pinatubo. And then when Mount Pinatubo erupted, they were basically forced off the mountain into the lowlands. And they were literally, in loincloth at that point. And now they were forced to go into the lowlands and, deal with the Filipinos. Again, Alison Nordstrom. She's such a beautiful writer. This is also in Pakistan, in northern Pakistan. Again, playing with flash blur. And many of these images where there's eye contact, they would like end on the cutting room floor when we were editing for stories in the moment. But in retrospect, that's one of the beautiful things when you can look back on your work out of context and sort of appreciate them just for what they are, as photographs, as opposed to, does this serve a story? Does this serve a layout? This is in Nigeria. And this is in Marseille, France. There's a protest, a workers' protest. Again, back in Nigeria. as in Myanmar. Excuse me. As in Madagascar, they were performing this annual ritual where it was really beautiful, where the rice farmers, they basically, all them and all their neighbors would come with their cattle and take an area where they were ready to plant and basically just stomp on the ground and roll in it, like basically just soften the plot of land so that they can then plant their seeds. And this is also in Marseille. One could say this is a bit of a sneaky approach to photography. So this is actually the most recent image from this work, which is Rodeo Drive 2020. I had received a big commission for a Danish newspaper to go spend 30 days traveling. This is during the pandemic, from LA to New Orleans in the run up to the election 2020, and kind of taking the pulse of America. And so I noticed, this beautiful gold light refracting off of the facade of this clothing store. So I just sort of positioned myself, just waiting, as we often do as photographers, waiting for something to happen or some magic to occur. And this sort of ensemble of folks started to approach, and I'm literally just doing this. I'm just sort of, and it's not that they can't see me. I'm a relatively big guy with a camera. But the idea is to not be quite as blatant. And that's the image. And this is from Beirut, shot through a rainy car window. So I always find it interesting, but it's so true that words are actually what propel me. It's even though I'm, a visual artist or storyteller, it's really everything emanates from words for me, whether it's, the Kurds are the largest ethnic group in the world without a nation of their own. I want to learn more about that story. Or it's a feeling or a mood or an expression that then just kind of set me off to visually look for that or try to fulfill it in some way, anyway, work with it. So this is the end page of the book, but what I wanted to share now is just a little bit of the structure of the book, because it's, again, unlike a more journalistic or documentary piece of work where there's a kind of linear narrative and there's facts or there's certain chronology that you want to express. In this case, we're making it all up we're all making up as we went. I spent about 10 years putting this book together with different iterations of people working with me in my studio. And these are words that in some ways, these are expressions that reflected, different ways that I feel about photography, about life. I was actually a very shy, insecure kid. And for me, the camera brought me out of that. And it gave me the confidence to go out in the world and approach people and talk to people. And it's absolutely because of the camera that I was able to achieve that. And then here are just some spreads, when one of the great and exciting creative challenges of putting a book together is the layout. And, how do you weight the pictures? How do you combine images together to get maximum kind of impact or have them play off each other? So I just wanted to share some examples of ways that we did that with this book. I mean, in certain ways, this is a very traditional layout, in terms of, we didn't do a lot of funky things with the book itself, but I wanted the images to breathe on the page. I did not want anything but, page numbers in the book because I really wanted the images to just speak for themselves. And bless you. And then if people wanted to learn more, we put a glossary in the back of the book. This is very early on in Colombia. I think I was like 22 years old when I made these pictures. Yeah, and so then there's just a few spreads of this glossary as a way to sort of, because I do find that people often want to know, oh, where was that picture made or when? And that's the last image. Thank you. We have time for questions, I assume?
Questions if you'd like to learn more?
Well, I've used Canon since, I was a photo student in the 70s when all the Nikon users would make fun of you. Oh, you're not a real photographer. Who got the last writing? Who got the last laugh? No. But yeah, and then I worked with Leicas through the years, but at this point, since 2003-4, when I went fully digital, it's all Canon gear. And then the new Fuji cameras are also really wonderful. I was fortunate enough to receive a few from Fuji, so I'll occasionally play around with those. They're sort of like the poor man's digital Leica, I see them as, and yeah. You mean like how do I take care of myself? Or yeah. Well, there's legal and illegal ways. No. Well, first of all, and I know this might sound so cliche, but it's really true, is that my kids, and of course, Julie, my mate, I don't know what I don't like folks who do this and don't have a family. I don't understand how they keep their sanity, because it's, first of all, an incredibly lonely profession. I was on the road 6 to 8 months a year for the last 35 years. And that's not an exaggeration. And the pandemic has actually really brought that to light, because I've been traveling, but not nearly as much in the last 2 years. So I've now gotten a taste of what it's like to be more domesticated. It's a scary scene. No, so it's in therapy, absolutely, going in and out of therapy. Sometimes I don't need it, other times I need it, but I would say, it's the family and therapy. And then, yeah, I don't know, exercising, just trying to stay healthy, eat healthy, but it's very much of a roller coaster, as my wife would attest. No, there were times where she was like, would you please go on Prozac? Because she was so burnt out on seeing me be either like really amped up or just completely, dejected, especially in the years when the kids were, young or teens, and, they really needed a dad who was not going crazy, but so that's it, and just, I guess, the fortitude to keep on, as I say, get up, dust yourself off and keep on trying to move forward. Yeah. And believing in what you do.
Can you talk a little bit about your workflow when you're on assignment? Are you doing selects? Are you sending the whole thing?
Okay.
So if you could summarize the question that you're asking online. Repeat the question.
Okay, thank you. So, can you repeat the question? No, sorry. My workflow, like what is my workflow when I'm in the field? Well, it varies. It depends on, if I'm, which I don't do that often, like a 1 or 2 day assignment, that's different than working for weeks or months. But in general, especially since the digital workflow has come into being, which I love, I am not, there's no romance or nostalgia for me with film, even though it's an amazing thing to do. But, anyway, so it's pretty disciplined, every night, download, put in the metadata, back up in triplicate on 3 drives, because hard drives will always fail. And I don't want to lose any pictures. So I back them in triplicate and then, clear my cards, and I'm ready for another day of battle. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, please. Or editing.
The editing process, are you relying on the editors to do a massive take edit?
Sure.
Or are you determining your selects that you give them?
Okay. So again, it varies because I do a lot of personal projects where there is no client. I am the client, so to speak. So in that case, I rely on, whoever is working with me in my studio, to be sort of the extra set of eyes to sort of dissuade me when pictures aren't really good and I'm in love with them, or to sometimes help me discover things I'm not seeing, because we form our own prejudices about our work. Or it could be like, if one of you say, wow, that's a really great picture, well, then for the rest of my life, that's going to be a really great picture, regardless of how I actually felt. So there's a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Influence. But anyway, so when I'm working on my own projects, it's a very insular approach where I'm working intimately with the people who are working right around me. Like on the Nat Geo projects, then I'm working with an editor in DC, and you are naked. You go through everything, whether it was film days or digital days. You literally go from the very first image. I don't care if you shot 40,000 images to the 40,000th image in sequence. And I cannot tell you how much you learn by doing that. I learned so much working not only with great editors, but working in that mode, because, there'd be times where, if you'll allow me to continue with this, where it's like and it's interesting thinking about some of the long sequences I showed where, you're watching a scene progress, and, and then sometimes it'd be like, all of a sudden I'm somewhere else. And my editor would be like, why did you leave that scene? And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't think there was anything there. Or the opposite, where I shoot 25 rolls on one thing and there's not one goddamn good picture. And then it'd be like, why did you stay so long there? So it's a really interesting learning process when you look at your work in that way. You can understand so much about, you can remember like, right, I left that scene because my back hurt, or someone, whatever, I suddenly got depressed, or whatever it may be, that you get a glimpse into your own internal workings, and hopefully then learn better, how to work better. Did I get it that time? Cool. All right.
When you chose to utilize the flash, drag, slow ambient, and scene, when you're deciding to use your flash with the slow shutter speed and have that very unique look, is it something where you say, I'm going to go out and do that for that whole afternoon or that whole scene, or are you going back and forth and just kind of feeling it out for both?
Yeah. So when do I choose to sort of deploy the flash blur approach? Right. So again, earlier in my career, it was very deliberate and very intentional. I'm going to go out now, it's dusk, with my flash, and I want to wait until I could be at a 30th or a 15th of a second, it'd be that precise, if you like. But then as the time rolled on, I rarely use flash now. So for me, flash now is a problem solving tool. There's not enough light, or it could be an aesthetic decision. Like I want to pop that person out of the scene, or I want to illuminate something in some way that the existing light will not allow me to do. So I sort of, over the years, I shifted from using it as a deliberate aesthetic technique to now something that is like in my toolkit, but I don't deploy it that often. Yes.
How does working your digital workflow and looking at work while you're in the field either liberate you to pursue new directions or make you more conservative in your approach to scene?
Yeah, so that's a great question. You know, how does, I guess, reviewing your work in the digital workflow when you're in the field impact how you work, essentially? It cuts both ways, you know, like it's great to go back tonight and go, I got it. Wow, it's an amazing picture. And then now I don't need to continue on that aspect of the story, right? But that also might be a bad thing, right? Because maybe if I do another day, no matter how good the picture I've made, I might make an even better one. Or better isn't the right word, you know, more important, whatever it may be. So it's a tricky one. It can make you actually lazy. I think that's the part. I think that's, to me, the heart of your question, or the heart of the answer to your question, is that you need to be careful in the same way that you shouldn't chimp, right? Where you take a picture and you look at it, right? And when you're looking down, you've taken yourself out of the scene. It's the same thing when you pull out a damn phone and, right? Oh, things are calm for a moment. I pull out my phone. Oh my God, something just happened. Or I am being incredibly rude to the people I'm with. So the whole digital universe has created, I think, a real set of challenges for etiquette, just as a human, and then as a photographer, like dangerous, like black holes you can step into that actually diminish your photography, you know, and again, most importantly, it takes you out of the moment. It takes you out of the scene.
When you were creating your book and you were thinking of font and color, number one, is that font your actual
Yeah.
approach? And
Although someone criticized it recently.
wonderful, because when you're childlike, and I think it's perfect. And the color, did you ponder what would be the
Okay, so yeah, so in creating the book, you were asking about like why did we do that typeface and also the color of the book. So the typeface, maybe you guys know this. There's, I guess, a software program where you literally you have a sheet of paper with blocks and you write every letter in the alphabet, every whatever exclamation points and numbers, and then you scan it in, and it creates a font that is your font. And so my childish handwriting in block letters. So anyway, so we decided, because the idea of, it's a love letter to photography, it's something very personal, intimate, that I don't know whether it was the right choice. We decided to approach the text in that way. In terms of the color, that really came about on a Zoom call with Klaus Kehrer of Kehrer Books. They're in Heidelberg in Germany. He's a tremendous guy, amazing book publisher, real sweetheart as well. And we were having a creative meeting, and originally I wanted the cover to be just words against like a light powder blue background. And he was like, I think with the publisher's head, nobody who sees that on a bookshelf is going to pick it up. That we need something that's going to really capture people's attention. And so then we went through some of the images, we got down to a handful of images, and then we decided on the one that is on the cover. And in that process, we also came up with a color scheme playing off of the color in that picture.
We're going to turn the lights on so we can look at some of the pictures that Ed made, and also give time for anybody who'd like to look at the book and talk to Ed about the book, to do that and maybe take a book home. So unless there's any last minute questions, we'll open it up.
This was going back to what you were talking about being in places where you're in the middle of the war. Do you know photographers that are in Ukraine right now? And do you have anything to share about that? And part two is, would you be going over?
So, okay. Do I know photographers working in Ukraine or Poland right now? And do I plan to go over? I'll take the second one first. No, I do not plan on going over. I was just having a conversation with someone who I'm mentoring, this brilliant young photographer, Sebastian Hidalgo in Chicago. And he was saying, dude, there's something like 2,500 journalists there. like, why should I go? Or, it was making him think like he's young, anyway. So my attitude is there's nobody who's going to give me an assignment at this stage in my career, and I'm not going to go over there when there's that many people covering it. But what Julie and I are working on a plan to do something in conjunction with the Seven Foundation. And it's a project they've got called Dispatches in Exile. And the idea would be, if we can make this work, is that sometime in the summer, we would go over to probably Poland and try to work through an organization to locate 15 to 20 Ukrainian refugees who'd be willing to do this, and spend a week training them how to use their smartphones to make still pictures, video, and write captions and write. And then basically for the next year, have them send dispatches wherever they are, where hopefully they go back home or they're still in limbo. And over the course of a year, every week or two, have them send material to us. And so our job, Julie and my job, would be to sort of archive and curate that work. And maybe we might make a film, we'll see down the road. So that's right now the way I'm thinking of approaching this particular issue. Okay. Now, I know so many people who are over there. There's at least 8 photographers from 7 Photo that are over there. All right. I think only one, Ron Haviv, is US based. I think everyone else, they're either European. And then we have Mary Gelman, who's an LGBTQ 27-year-old Russian photographer in St. Petersburg, who has had to now stop communicating with us. She's our youngest member. We brought her in, I think, 2 years ago. Beautiful photographer, very sensitive, lovely, lovely work. And, but yeah, now that Putin has closed down Instagram, Facebook, and everything, we were communicating with her through WhatsApp, but we haven't heard from her in about a week. So, and then there's, oh my God, there's so many folks. Maciek Nabrdalak, who's a Polish photographer. He's working for the New York Times. Anyway, so we have a lot of folks there. And then there must be another 10 or 15 photographers that I have mentored at some point in my life that are there. And then a whole bunch of others that I just know their names, but I maybe haven't met them. So I'm assuming you've all seen Lindsay Adario's work, or if you watch CNN, she left, but she was doing tremendous work for the New York Times. But it's a dangerous situation. It's an interesting conflict because on the one hand, you can get there easily. It's European. It's more familiar than like working in other parts of the world. Things basically work. I mean, I don't know the actual current conditions depending on where you are, but you have this sort of unpredictable Russian bombardment, and then you have like assassins who are clearly targeting journalists. So it's a like I've been in situations, whatever, in Nigeria or in Afghanistan or Iraq, where I felt so out of control because it's asymmetrical warfare now, right? There's no front line. But this is different because you can be lulled into thinking things are okay. We're driving down a modern highway and boom, all of a sudden a mortar hits. So it's a tricky one. Anyway.
So Ed, can we move here?
Yeah, anything you want. Yes. Thank you so much, folks.
Just saying hello.